in extension to the Bagya Technologies demo for the QA Complete Career Package training. So it's a software testing course. It's an end-to-end software testing course that is like no other in terms that it is a complete package that includes both front-end, middleware, and back-end testing, and also includes work management. So we will teach you end-to-end software testing, concepts, the software test planning, the software test designing, execution, test metrics. So all that is there in terms of the testing topics. Plus we'll also talk about SQL. So we will teach you the data manipulation languages, the data definition languages, and all the other RDBMS core concepts, following that with Unix commands, the shell scripting to a certain extent, not really the programming part, but how to work with the shell scripts and stuff like that. In addition to that, we also have Jira. So this is a 30-hour package, 30-hour program that spans over 5 weeks. So as I was saying in the other, in the demo orientation video, if you haven't checked that out yet, please go ahead and take a look at that as well. As I was saying, this is a video where we will deal with a very small basic testing concept to give you an idea of how, the class is going to be conducted, in real time. I, for one, believe that this is a very important exercise because every student has to like interacting with the teacher, has to trust the teacher, has to really, put your faith into a mentor and, take on this journey of learning a skill together. And it's a very difficult risk. It's actually a very, gratifying responsibility for the teacher. And at the same time, it has to be beneficial for the student as well at the end of the day. And I also know that, a teacher or, the way a teacher handles a class can make or break your interest in the subject. So I take this, personally, I take this very, very seriously, very, very serious responsibility. I understand that. So this is an opportunity for you to try me out, to see whether or not you're going to enjoy these sessions, to give you a glimpse of how this interaction is going to go forward should you decide to enroll in the class. So today, to demonstrate that aspect, I have picked up a small topic, defects. Now this will be a very practical session. One, because I'm not a big fan of slideshows where I take you slide by slide. I would rather get my hands dirty and show you a practical concept. And I'm also not going to get too technical because chances are if you're watching a demonstration, you're trying to learn QA. So I believe that there is practically no topic in the world that cannot be broken down into, smaller, simpler, fundamental topics. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to keep it very, very non-technical. We are going to keep it simple. We are going to talk about defects to a certain extent to give you an idea of how classes will be conducted should you decide to join Bagya Technologies. All right, let's begin with what a defect is. Now I'll go and we'll talk about it in terms of the formal definition of what a defect is. Basically, a defect is a deviation from the expected behavior. That's what the definition says. What it really means is you expect something to happen, it does not, or something else happens in its place. That kind of, your expectation not meeting, that's basically a defect. A lot of times, since I've been a QA for a long time, and I've been teaching for a long time, a lot of my students feel that it's not a defect unless, something crashes or something, the page is not found, or the link does not work, or there is an error message coming up on the screen. So defects in real time are not so dramatic, to be really honest. So nothing as bad as a page crashing or, things completely crumbling down. Things like that don't happen real time. Defects are much more subtle. Defects are much more, hidden in a way that testers have to delve deeper and bring it out. So for now, let's just focus on what defect is. Defect is you expect something to happen and it does not, or something else happens in its place. So it's as simple as that. Now, before we expect a certain behavior, how do we know that that behavior is supposed to be happening? For example, if I am going to say, compose an email and click on send, what tells me, how do I know that what is supposed to happen? right? Now, normally, since I'm a user for, say, Gmail or Yahoo Mail or something, I know what's going to happen because I've used it a few times. But for a totally new system, how would you know what is supposed to happen? There comes the documentation, requirements, so on and so forth. So, a defect for QAs, to identify something as a defect, it is very important to know what should be the expected behavior. And that behavior is something that you will find in your technical documents, like your business requirement document, functional requirement document, technical requirement documents, or use cases, wireframes. So not to worry if you are not very familiar with all of these already, but these are all some sort of reference documents that are available in order for testers to determine or know what is the expected behavior. Now, once we have the application on hand, we work on it, and if something is not as expected, we just, successfully have stumbled on a defect. Now, let me actually practically show you how we find defects. So for that, as I said, I like, practice. I like getting hands-on with something. So let's actually take an application, and I'll show you the process of finding defects. And I'll also show you that defects are not as dramatic as we think that they should be. And we'll also talk about what we do when we identify the defects. How do we log them, or, how do we report them? So those are the things that we will talk about going further. Now, right now, I have an application here, which is this is actually an open EMR application. This is an open source system, very, very simple to download, launch, and start using. This is basically a hospital management system that hospitals use in order to maintain their patients, create appointments, create reminders, generate bills, all of that stuff. But none of that is relevant for us for now. So I'm just going to log into the system. Now, if you see here, the activity right now, I'm testing. But if you were to be a user, or say for example, if you were like a Gmail user or a Yahoo Mail user, what would you do? You would normally enter your username, your password, and you'll click sign in, right? So that's exactly what I did as well. So I hope this actually shows you that, what a tester does and what a user does, they're not very different. That is why testing is a field that can be embraced by even the most non-technical people very, very easily, because testing is not different from using. The only thing that's different is our critical thinking, is our skepticism that comes into it. So while you're using, you would never doubt the system. You would simply use it for what you need to achieve. But when you're testing it, you would use it. But in addition to checking what you are achieving, you're also checking what are the limits, what is the extent of your achievement, what is it that you can do, what is it you cannot do. So you're actually broadening your scope. While you're using the system, you're actually critically thinking about whether something is right or wrong. So that's one of the reasons why testing is so, it's actually, it gives you a beautiful insight into what the business should be like, what the users are expecting. So all of these become much, much clearer when you are a tester. So again, back to the point, defects. How do we find defects? As I said, testing is nothing but using. So you would normally use this system. I mean, formally, if you are testing formally, I mean, while you take this class, you'll see that there is a formal process of testing before we directly jump into identifying defects. But then, to simplify it, testing is just using the system. So I'd simply use the system. Now, right here, you see there is a option to create a patient. Now, what would I do? I would normally try and enter a patient information to this system. So here, there are various fields. Now, as a tester, you do not have any boundaries. You can pretty much use this application in any extremities that you would like, and you can explore it in any way you like. And if you find a difference, or if you find a difference in the expected behavior, you're always welcome to log a defect. Now, there are various techniques to testing. So there is, when there is a numeric field, there's boundary value analysis, equivalence partitioning, there is different ways, different, principles in order to guide you on how to test and how to identify defects. Now, right now, I'm testing without using any documents, without using any, none of the test cases, none of that stuff. So I'm basically randomly doing this and that on the site. This kind of testing where you do not follow a documented structured approach is actually called exploratory testing or ad hoc testing. So right now we are doing an ad hoc test. We are conducting an ad hoc test. That means we are simply using a system randomly. We may or may not stumble into a bug. So right now let me actually create a bug. Create a patient, and we'll see if we could find a bug. And I know for a fact that we are, so because I've used the system before. So right now I've created my name, an external ID, just give a random number. Now if you're wondering how do I know what value to put, see, IDs are probably like a driver's license ID, or if you belong to a healthcare or some sort of an insurance system, you probably have a member ID, so some kind of a number. Numerics work, so I'm just taking a guess here. I don't know what number I'm supposed to put. But then if you are formally going through the end-to-end test process, that is the software testing life cycle, all this information of what you need to enter at what point, this would be a part of the test data gathering process, which is the second stage of software testing life cycle, that is the test design phase. So since this is ad hoc or exploratory random testing, I'm not following any documentation. I'm free to enter whatever I would like. Now coming to date of birth, this is a calendar feature that lets me enter select a particular date. So usually hospitals actually register a patient even before they're born, right? Say if you have a newborn coming up and you want to make a pediatrician's appointment for them once they are born, you probably would make it in advance before even the baby is born. So here the future date or a past date, all of these dates are valid. So always think about what is valid, what is not valid, where are its limits, how can I push the limits. So these I think are the common questions that as testers we should ask ourselves. So right now I'll just choose a past date, probably somebody who's a month or so old. This is my SSN, probably nothing. The license ID, I'll probably not enter anything. Let's see if it says if that's mandatory or not. So I'll just create a new patient. So I have the last name is need not be empty, and I must choose the gender. So a lot of times we think that when I said create patient and it gave me that pop-up, that is an error. That's not an error. That's actually the expected behavior. Because if I am leaving any mandatory data empty, the site is supposed to tell me, site is supposed to notify the user that, hey, you haven't entered something correctly. So that is something we expect it to do, correct? So that is an expected behavior. That's not a defect. So defects, as I said, they're not as dramatic as that. So, something in red will not pop up and say that it is a defect. I mean, there might be defects like that, but generally defects are more subtle. So right now, what it does is it checks whether or not a similar patient exists. Otherwise, it will ask you to confirm a patient and you can create a new patient. Now, what I want to do here is next, I'll go ahead and create another one. So all I'm trying to show you is the correct behavior, and the correct behavior is something that we have seen. Now let me show you an incorrect behavior. So here I'm going to choose the gender, and right now what I'm going to do is I'll just choose a date. And there's also another method in testing called error guessing, where the testers use their intuition to see how the system will behave in an extreme situation. So here what I'll check is, I'll see if, this site actually takes the date as February 31st. That's a non-existent date, correct? So I'm going to create a patient. And let's see what happens here. So this is what I mean by defects being more subtle. Now, not only does the site accept a date that is invalid, non-existent. It creates a patient with the date of birth as all zeros, which is also not a valid date, and the age as 2014, which is practically not possible for any human beings. So this is a defect. This is something that the system should be able to handle, and pop up a notification saying that, hey, you've chosen an incorrect date, please choose a correct one. Instead, it does not give a user notification, but it chooses and goes ahead and does some processing which is completely against the norms. So this is a defect, as subtle as that. Defects can be as subtle as that. And as you can see, whether you find a defect by following the test cases or by randomly following tester's intuition, a defect is a defect. Now what do you do when you find a defect? Because defects are, you don't want to just find a defect and keep it to ourselves. Defects are things that have to go get processed and get eliminated in the process. Now a lot of times, especially beginners, think that testing means to find defects and fix them. Fixing defects will mean that you will have to work with the code, manipulate the code, change the code, and remove this problem. But as testers, neither do we have the technical expertise, nor it is our job description to go ahead and do that. So usually, testers' jobs, we don't fix the bug. We find the bug and we report the bug. And the defect reporting process is called logging a defect or reporting a defect, creating a defect. So all of this, words are, it's called all of these things depending on the context. All of these things mean the same thing. So once I have found this defect, it's my job to now go ahead and report this defect. So usually a defect report or a bug report is created in several ways actually. Companies have defect management software, so once bugs are found, they can be reported in the defect management software like Jira, which is also part of the program. Or you could actually report them in Excel sheets, much more, simple. And mostly, companies, even though they're using another tool, they would prefer creating them in Excel sheets. At the end of the day, they go ahead and, eliminate all the invalid defects and make sure that the valid ones are picked and then entered into a system like Jira. Again, different companies follow different processes. But all I'm saying is once you learn the defect reporting process in an Excel sheet, it becomes very easy for you to go ahead and use another software to be able to do that. So I'll simply show you how to report this bug. Defect report writing is probably one of the biggest or most commonly done tasks for a QA team member. So we might as well get a head start on that, correct? So I'm going to use a simple plain old Excel sheet. Now before we go any further, there'll be always questions on how do we call a defect a defect? Do we call it a bug, error, fault? What is it? My opinion is you can use all of these terms interchangeably. There's no difference between an error, bug, and defect. Although there are some professional blogs that will tell you that there are small subtle differences. But as far as I know, as far as my experience goes, at the floor, if there is a defect, it's a defect. There is none of the other variations. Might be depending on the company's culture and what nomenclature they are familiar with, but there is really no difference. So I would go ahead and create a defect or a bug ID. Let's call this a bug report. Then comes the description or the title or the summary, however you want to refer this. And then you would go ahead and assign a severity. Severity is like the importance. Usually whether it is a very critical bug, major bug, minor bug, all of that, you can go ahead and assign that. Before the severity, you can actually include a step called the steps to reproduce. So always think about who this report is going to go to. Who are you sending this information to? We are actually sending this to another team, the development team, to interpret and act on it. So it is our job to provide them with clear-cut instructions on what the problem is, how did we encounter it, how can they actually recreate it to see what the problem is, right? So steps to reproduce, and finally we also attach a screenshot. Now, by no means is every bug report should have the same fields. That's not true. You can have more fields or less fields. Less, I wouldn't go for it because this is pretty much mandatory information, but you can expand this. For example, if you want to write the name of the reporter, the tester who has found it, or the module of the application where this was found, all those are okay. You can include all of that. Now, when it comes to the bug ID, I normally like serial numbers because why complicate it, right? So serial numbers is a good way to go, but you don't have to do that. Let's say if it's a login bug and you want to do something like this, login_1, that's okay. But I believe it complicates that, so serial numbers are perfectly okay. Now try to describe your bug in a line or two. Now this is like a gist of what the problem is, 1 or 2 lines. Right now, my problem is that new patient creation module accepts February 31st, an invalid date as the patient's date of birth. So this is something that you want to get it right, and it takes experience. Again, I'm not being boastful or, I'm not bragging or anything like that. All I'm saying is, see, a lot of times we hear that for testers, communication is very important. And we seem to think that that communication means how well you talk to your team members or, how well you send your emails or none of that. I mean, of course, all of that is important. But most importantly, a tester's communication is all about how well you're talking about the application, how well you're letting the other team know what the defect is. See, here if I say February 31st or, date of birth takes February 31st, 2014. So if I write something like that, and trust me, right now when I'm showing you this example, you might think who would write it like that, but trust me, many people write it like that. And that is very vague. You don't know where that is happening. And why do you think, see, sometimes it's easy to misread things. So maybe the tester will take a look at it and developer will take a look at it and start thinking, why is that, why shouldn't it take that date? So here we are mentioning that it's an invalid date. We are letting them know that, it's a new patient creation. So we are actually not leaving any room for any ambiguity or, any information that is uncommunicated. So that's very important. Make sure that with your defect reports, you take your time, understand what is the problem that you're trying to state, and state it as clearly, concisely, straight, without any room for ambiguity or, without any room for incompleteness. Moving to steps to reproduce. So this is pretty much like the step-by-step procedure of what you followed. So log into the application, or if you want to mention, you can mention OpenEMR. If you want to mention the user ID and password that you've used to log in, go ahead and do that. So when it comes to the defect report, over information is better than under. So if you are providing an information you feel like maybe I'm going over the edge, that's okay. Go ahead and provide it all the same. Then you would click on new patient from the top left corner of the screen. Then enter the name, gender, date of birth as February 30th, 2014. So here what we've done is, actually it won't let us choose February 31st, 2014 because the calendar is not there. So what we've done precisely is choose any date using the calendar and then type in February 31st, 2014. So we are exactly telling them how we were able to achieve the February 31st date. And then click create new patient. So what were you expecting here? What was the expected behavior here? We expected that the patient creation would not be successful and then error is displayed. But instead what is happening is The patient is created, age is 2004, and date of birth is 0. Now is this a very critical problem? Probably not, because see, if a real user, so always severity, or how serious the problem is to be set from the perspective of the user. See, if I was somebody who is, say for example, I'm using ICICI Bank, I'm scheduling a transfer of money to happen, I wouldn't deliberately choose February 31st, correct? So it's a very unlikely situation that the end user might actually do. So I would say this severity is minor. Now usually every company has its own set of severity factors that are valid, that they can use, and those definitions will be provided in the test plan and should be agreed on by the entire team. So how serious is this problem? How much of a user impact will this problem have is something that we will try to assign when we assign the severity field. Finally, the screenshot. So screenshots are very important to denote exactly what is the problem. So I would just do a print screen. Either put it in Paint or I would put it in a Word document, whichever is fine. I would just paste it, save it as an image. So another best practice that I recommend is when you are giving a title, so you always untitled.jpg is okay, but then give a name that is relevant, so that if the developer is saving all the images on the screen on their desktop, and if they are actually trying to get to the exact one, they will be able to easily find it with the help of the name there. And then you can attach the screenshot right here, or you can add it as an object, which is what I prefer to do. So when we click that, you will be able to see this. So that's how we create a basic defect report. I hope this presentation gave you a good idea of how this session is going to be, and how we report the bugs and all that. So following the bug, we actually create a report and send it to the developers, and they will act on it. But then that's how defects are dealt with. So this is just a simple sample topic to give you an idea of how the class is going to go, and I hope that was helpful, and I hope you enjoyed the course of this tutorial. But if you have any questions, as always, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help you. Thank you.